Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. We started before a series called Christians Are Traumatized, Traumatizers, and it seems like it definitely hit some people where they were at in terms of their thought process of how to get through what they're healing from and reclaiming their identity. In that first part of this monologue series, we opened the door to the idea that we've carried some things in silence for a long time, and that it's important for us to be able to name this system that has shaped us, Christianity. And we saw it for so long as a beacon of hope, as basically our lifeline to wonderful things, but it was also really a machine. It was a machine of fear. It was the pipeline for the trauma that we've been talking through. It was dressed in the language of love, but we talked about how we were trained from childhood to be in fear of eternal torment, before we could really understand what the idea of a metaphor was. We learned to call God's abuse discipline. We would do things like consider anxiety about the spiritual realm to be reverence. We'd call shame humility. And we talked about how we were taught to basically hate ourselves, to distrust every thought, every instinct, every flicker of desire that didn't line up with the doctrine, with the church culture. And our minds were basically colonized. Our curiosity was pushed aside, even criminalized. And every question that we dared to whisper was captured and chained and dragged back into obedience. And the worst part, again, that we talked about was we passed it on. This is a pass it on worldview. This isn't take this and make it yours. It's take it, make it yours, and force everyone else to have also either take it or be told that they're going to pay eternally for their lack of taking it. We weren't just victims of this system. We were participants. We were enforcers. We were the evangelists of our own oppression. And we taught what we were taught. We harmed in the same way that we were harmed. Not necessarily because we were cruel, but because we truly believed that it was real and it was love. But now the veil is lifting, and that's what we're talking through in this series. The silence is cracking. We're naming the trauma, not just as something that happened to us, but as something that was engineered into the very foundation of our faith and our culture, the way that we lived. And so today I want to continue on that journey, talk about a few points. This will take a while to talk through. There's going to be a lot of points, so there might be 5 or 6 different sessions to this one. I think it's worth going through it all. And some of these topics relate to other things. We'll talk about down the line, so you'll hear some crisscross eventually. But this is going to be considered part 2 of the idea that Christians are traumatized traumatizers. We are continuing our painful, but hopefully deeply liberating journey of unlearning. So let's pick up where we left off. The next topic I want to talk about in this series is the idea of how authority gets severely abused. And it's because we see pastors as basically untouchable tyrants. Hebrews 13:17 says, "Obey your leaders and submit to them, for they keep watch over your souls." And there's almost, in certain churches, at least a hush that comes over the congregation when the pastor enters the room. It's as if they're the judge presiding over a major court case. And you feel it, inside of you, this quiet reverence. It's like an invisible line that no one is supposed to cross or dare to cross. And it's not just because the man loves Jesus, although that may be part of it, but it's because we sense that he's speaking for him. Not quite as Catholic as ex cathedra, speaking from the chair, but he's speaking for God. He's God's representative. And we would technically, theologically say, well, the only representative for God, the Father, is Jesus, his Son. But on earth, the pastor becomes, in a sense, really the spokesperson for God. The person that tells you what needs to be on your mind, which passage we're going to look at this week, as well as what particular interpretation of it, as well as what application of it. It blows my mind the way that we have, for generations upon generations upon generations, lifted up a fallible man that perhaps behind closed doors is even a jerk or abusive or unlearned in some way, and yet they're speaking for God. And that's the myth. And it's one of the most effective weapons in all of Christianity, because when you have this man standing on the stage with a mic and a Bible and a title, he doesn't really have to earn your trust. He just inherits it. We just grant it to him instantly, automatically, unquestionably. And from that moment on, the power imbalance is firm and complete. He speaks and you listen. He declares and you accept. He rebukes and you repent. He interprets it this way and you do too. There's no negotiation. There's no healthy challenge. There's no safe place for dissent. If you were to dare to push back, you're prideful and arrogant. And if you ask questions, you're rebellious. And if you try to hold him accountable, you're gossiping or divisive, or you're under a spiritual attack. You're trying to split the church. In most churches, pastors aren't just teachers. They're sort of like mini kings with Bibles for scepters and pulpits for thrones. And what makes it continue in this insidious nature is that the system keeps on protecting them. It's like it's written into the theology. There's these verses that are sometimes cherry-picked, but they're definitely there. It says, touch not the Lord's anointed. It says, let the elders who rule well be counted worthy of double honor. And it says, woe to the shepherds who scatter the flock. So they build this fortress of doctrine around themselves. And then they tell the flock, this is for your protection. But the truth is that that fortress wasn't there to protect the people. It was there to protect the power. I mean, we've seen it. We've seen it far too up close and personal. You know, we watch church elders who silence women who came forward about inappropriate advances. We've seen charismatic youth pastors use their platform to flirt and manipulate and gaslight while they're being applauded for being relatable. We've sat in rooms, some of us, where abuse survivors were asked, what could you have done differently to have avoided the situation? And meanwhile, the pastor gets carte blanche. He gets a sabbatical. He gets a carefully worded statement from the pulpit to speak his truth. He gets prayers for restoration and a full-blown redemption arc on Instagram before the dust is even settled. Because the reputation of the church matters more to Christians than the safety of its people. And when the pastor is kind of the brand, accountability becomes a PR liability. And the people will defend him. That's one of the worst parts, is they will defend him. They'll say, oh, he's just human. Satan's attacking our leader. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We shouldn't judge. Because they've been trained and indoctrinated to prioritize charisma, charm over character, and image of the pastor and the church over integrity, and hierarchy over truth and healing. And it creates this cycle, a vicious cycle, where spiritual leadership becomes a magnet for narcissists. Because where else can a man come up and claim, I've got divine authority, I can speak without challenge, and you will applaud me for controlling you people's lives? Where else can emotional manipulation en masse be called shepherding? And gaslighting be justified as some version of spiritual discernment? Where else can you say, God told me, and then you can use that to override everyone else's own inner voice? Only in church, in a system that has spiritually engineered obedience as this form of worship. And so we watch as our leaders fall and be restored faster than the people that they harmed. We watch churches cover for predators, and they call it grace. They call it restoration. They call it, this is the gospel. This is how the gospel works. The gospel takes sinners and makes them renewed. And we watch victims walk away quietly while the pastor stays behind and tells their story their way. And the victor gets to determine the narrative. And so we sat in the pews, too scared to speak up, because we knew what would happen if we did. The rule is, if you question the pastor, then you're really kind of questioning God. And I know that there's some churches where that's literally true. I would say in my experience, it was not quite that firm, but in many churches, people I've talked to, that is exactly how it is. You question the pastor, you are literally giving God the finger. But we need to say this, and we need to say it firmly, strongly, clearly, without apology. If your God requires you to protect abusers, he's not a good God. He's not God at all. If your theology shields the powerful and silences the vulnerable, it's not holy. It's evil, if there was such a thing as true sin and evil. And if your pastor can't be questioned, he's not a shepherd. A pastor like that, that's unaccountable, is a tyrant in robes. And even Jesus, I think if he had been real, I don't think Jesus would have asked you to bow to him. But that's one of the major ways that Christians are traumatizers, is they get you from the earliest days to respect your pastor no matter what. And guys, if your pastor is in that role, number one, just by virtue of the fact that he's in that role, he's tricking people to believe in mythology as if it's real. That alone is crazy. But the fact that they get this free pass, this get out of jail free pass to do whatever they want and to be unaccountable, it's wrong. It's not healthy. It's toxic beyond belief. And it's yet another reason on top of a pile of 1,000 other reasons. It's another reason to say it's time to walk away from Christianity. And if you're already away from it, it's time to start healing. And when we start this healing process, part of it is realizing we have given people authority over our minds and our lives that they never should have had. Another big dynamic in Christians being traumatizers, is how they basically tell you that misogyny is the divine order. Ephesians 5:22, wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. 1 Timothy 2:11, let the woman learn in silence with all subjection. They never had to say, like clearly say, women are less than men. Women are less important. Women have less power. Women have less say. They have less vote, whatever. They just had to tell us submission was God's design. And we believed them because we were raised to. And you need to think through the fact that they're twisting words, they're manipulating you where they're saying one thing, but they mean something else. I hope you're doing that. I'm trying to do that, where you're saying, this is what I heard them say, but that was Christianese, that was gloss over, that was, these aren't the droids you're looking for. This was their way of schmoozing you into thinking this was about honoring God when it was actually about something else. You were taught that being feminine meant being quiet all the time. Being spiritual meant being somewhat invisible as a woman. Being godly meant giving up every ounce of power so that the men wouldn't feel threatened by your presence. And they call it biblical womanhood. And they said it's beautiful. But beauty is not going to blossom in cages. Or beauty that can only blossom in cages isn't really beautiful. It's pretend, it's fake, it's grooming. And women were taught often to say yes when they maybe meant no or maybe. They were taught to serve when they were exhausted, to forgive when they hadn't been heard, to smile when they were burning inside, and men would praise them for it. You praise the quiet women, the submissive wives, the wives that are willing to go just burn themselves out, burn the candle at both ends for the sake of their families and for the sake of the gospel, for the sake of submission, and modest daughters. Modest daughters was a big deal. The prayer warrior women who never said a word that made a man uncomfortable. And they tell us, Eve was the beginning of sin. Bathsheba was a temptress. And Mary Magdalene was bad. They exalt Paul, but the women are minimized, were erased. And they taught entire sermons on Proverbs 31, and they never asked the women, what do you think and what do you want? Because this wasn't about really your soul. This is about controlling your mind and your body. Cover up. Don't be a stumbling block. Men are visual. Modesty is your responsibility. If you made a man stumble, it's your fault. It was never about making women feel safe. It was making sure that men felt safe around them. Because if you have women in power, to a lot of men, that's dangerous. A woman who says no, a woman who leads without apology, who doesn't feel guilty for taking up space just like the men do. She's got a label coming, right? She's labeled rebellious, too boisterous, not submissive, not quiet, not a quiet spirit, a quiet and humble, contrite heart. She's like a Jezebel. She's ungodly. And she gets exiled or prayed over or shamed into silence. And, we look at Christian marriages. Christian marriages are framed as if it's this great partnership, but you do it God's way. Christian marriage is not about partnership. It's about divinely sanctioned hierarchy. Men are the head, women are the helper. Men speak, in a sense, for God, as if just like the pastor speaks for God over the church, men speak for God over the family. Women are there to support the man. And the closer a woman gets to her own clarity, her own voice, her own embodied wisdom, the louder the system screams that she's dangerous. You need to get her repressed, get her pushed down. How many women have we seen that shrink themselves, into bones to be godly wives, where their lives just cave in on themselves, but like this is the only way to honor God. Especially when you're talking about being perhaps married to an abusive man or submitting to the abusive leadership in a church. How many women of brilliant minds are taught to be silent and chose that perhaps because they didn't want to usurp male authority? How many survivors stayed in abusive homes because the church told them divorce would grieve God more than their suffering ever would? And we believed it. So many of us, we believed that submission was a form of love. Our submission to an abusive God is love. Your submission as a wife to an abusive husband is love and holiness. Being small, being under control in that context sort of makes you holy. And it's almost at times in some groups, like the more that you're willing to look past the abuse and being put down and being shrunk, the more submissive you are. There's this idea that in heaven, you're going to be exalted so far up that the contrast is almost like polar opposites. Like the more that you get pushed down and you do it graciously, you let it pass. You don't get angry, don't fight back, just let it go. Let God will take the revenge. He will repay. And the more you just let God do it in his time and you let yourself be shrunk down, it's almost like a boomerang. Or like a trampoline, you're going to jump up really far in heaven because God's going to reward you. But it doesn't. Of course, that the afterlife part of that is all mythology, but in this life, it just makes you disappear. In the moment that women reclaim their voice and stop apologizing, as it were, for their existence, stop apologizing for their innate power in their voice, realizing their body's not a liability, that's when so many churches will turn on them. Christianity doesn't just fear female sin, sexuality, it fears female sovereignty and autonomy. A woman who trusts herself is a woman who doesn't need permission. A woman who knows her worth is a woman who can't be manipulated easily. And a woman who walks in her full embodiment, her full light, is a woman who can't be used to prop up patriarchy. And that terrifies a lot of people. They're just not, it's just like I've asked the question before, is this world ready for Christianity, the mythology of it all, to end? Just like we'd say, well, Greco-Roman mystery cults, that mythology kind of ended. Certainly Sumerian mythology ended. A lot of it didn't end. It got repurposed in Christianity and other religions, in Judaism and in Islam, but it officially ended in the sense that most people don't go to a church for Zeus. That it kind of ended, and you say, well, the church, at some point the culture was ready and willing to move on from that. And I've asked the question, is this society ready to move on from Christianity? And some people would say yes, some people would say it's well overdue, some people would say no. If people don't have a transcendent meaning and purpose and accountability, they're just going to go crazy. They're going to steal and pillage wherever they want to. And it's a good, interesting question. Are we ready for no religion in this world? But in a similar sense, are we ready for no patriarchy? And I think a lot of men really struggle with that. But I think it's time to say it's too overdue. It's too overdue. Women are not meant to serve a hierarchy. They're not meant to serve in a misogynistic world. Like this is just we're both animals. We're animals who are trying to figure out our life in this world, our who we are, our sexuality, our power, our autonomy, our voice. There is nothing lesser about women, and there's nothing about women that makes them need to serve men or be subservient to them. That's old, that's ancient, that's part of what uneducated people thought. And women are powerful, and women don't need to be someone's helper to be amazing and wonderful, to have a fulfilling life. They don't need a man to lead them to God, even if they want to stay living in a worldview where they believe in God. They don't need a man to lead them to God. And you don't need a church and a Christian culture that tries to call misogyny sacred and really just the absolute necessity of the day if you're going to honor God. I remember when I was working on a book about Christian worldview, it was one of the last major parts of my life in Christianity. And I was focused on fighting evolution and saying it's not just about fighting evolution in terms of the scientific stuff, it's fighting the idea that everything is accidental. Like God doesn't do anything. He's not taking marbles and just kind of scattering them and hoping it looks artistic and creative and that it works well. He is very intentional. He's the master artist, the master musician. He's brilliant beyond our wildest dreams. He is so smart we can't comprehend it. The brilliance is at a level that we could think about it for a trillion years and we won't understand, a fraction of 1%. He's just that far beyond us. Not just in holiness and separation from sin, but in terms of his brilliance. And so I was saying in this book I was working on, everything that we see, the way the trees grow, the way the clouds are, it's all some kind of emblem to point us back to God. And I would have argued, I'm sure in that book, if I remember correctly, that the way that God set up the hierarchy of, men over the church and over the family, that was part of the way that God wants to lead us and guide us to reflect the way that we should be subservient to him. Where, a woman is subservient to a man in the same way that we as a church are subservient to our Lord and Savior. And in a similar way that Jesus ranked himself under God the Father and obeyed him in everything, was completely submissive. And you can paint it as esoteric and poetic and beautiful all day long. It's a pile of shit. It's a pile of hogwash. And I want to encourage you, as you think through how Christians traumatize each other and themselves and other people, a big part of this is misogyny. And whether they're ready to wake up or not, we're gonna yell it loud and clear. Misogyny needs to end in this culture. Patriarchy needs to end. And I do hope that you will think through how that has affected your life personally, because some of this stuff has trickled down so much, even though we're not part of the big wheels of the church or the big wheels of society in terms of the relationships that we have with each other. The reality is that when you're in this stuff for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, there's roots to pull up. So I encourage you, pull up any roots of misogyny that are in your heart, in your mind, and I think we'll all be much better people for it. Next way that I would argue that Christians are traumatizers, is how Christianity makes compulsory forgiveness a weapon. Matthew 6:15 says, if you don't forgive others their sins, your Father will not forgive your sins. And Matthew 18:22, he says, forgive 70 times 7. I mean, they're telling us over and over in hundreds of other passages, forgiveness is freedom. And this is going to unshackle your soul. It is the path to healing. Just forgive. Look at how much you've been forgiven. The parables that Jesus told, you've been forgiven like enough debt that you will take 10 lifetimes to pay it off, and you won't forgive the guy that did something that'll take him like a day to pay off. Like what contrast, what incredible arrogance it would take for someone in your spot, knowing how much you've been forgiven. You've been forgiven the whole universe, basically. Your soul's weight of sin has been forgiven. And look at what it costs God to do it. And you won't forgive your brother? And what they didn't say, what they probably never said, was how this weaponizes your forgiveness, because forgiveness is demanded. It's not something you can offer if you want to. It's demanded of you. You must forgive. You must forgive quickly. And they didn't tell us that the command to forgive would be frequently used to bypass justice or to silence the survivor, to let abusers walk away clean while the wounded are still arguably bleeding, hurting inside. They didn't tell us forgiveness in the church often might look like a tearful apology from a predator up on stage. I did something wrong. I've made amends. God has forgiven me. I'm accountable to the pastors. And you get a round of applause for it. The Bible verse about grace and forgiveness and starting over, about all things being made new. And, you get that whisper, you have to forgive them or you're going to be bitter. You better forgive them. They made bitterness the enemy. They should have made betrayal the enemy. They made unforgiveness, your lack of a forgiving spirit, they made that the sin instead of the original sin itself. And somewhere along the line in all this, as we're hearing these sermons and these Bible messages for years, we get the message as well that your anger or rage against what was done to you is basically unholy. And your desire for justice, for things to be made right in this situation, for the abuse to be, for there to be restoration of some kind, where there's amends made. Your desire for too much justice is just a lack of faith or a lack of your understanding how much you've been forgiven yourself. If you are desperately wicked and your heart is just so nasty that God had to literally die for you, who are you to stand over judgment? Like you did this, you've surely done many sins. This other guy did a different kind of sin. Like, who are you to judge which sin is worse? It's a lack of faith. It's a lack of understanding of the white hot holiness of God, or of how much you've offended God. And your refusal to reconcile is often framed as like, you don't understand what God has done for you in the gospel. And they never really stop to reframe it and consider and say, what happens to a person that's forced to reconcile and forgive before they're ready? Like, yeah, forgiveness is important as a concept. It is important as a choice. But there's a time, there's a season for everything. And when you're forced to forgive, like immediately, before you're ready, before you've even had time to process it, you're basically getting the whole situation pushed under the rug, and your voice is getting yet again squashed. What happens to your physical body when you're expected to hug somebody who in some way violated your body? What happens to your mind and your heart that's shamed? You're still hurting? What's wrong with you? You're still bitter about this? You're shamed for still hurting. And you're in that context, your spirit, your attitude, your psychology, it collapses in on itself. You cave in on yourself because you silence the truth. You're swallowing your screams. And you smile big. You say, I forgive you. But your teeth are clenched so tight, it's like it's bruising the inside of your mouth. And forgiveness isn't about healing the victim in church. It's about preserving the appearance of spiritual unity. Don't gossip. Let it go. It's under the blood. God has forgiven them. Why can't you? And the person in church who dares to say, I can't forgive him right now. I'm not ready. Maybe I'll never be ready. They often become the problem. They become the new issue. They become the whole issue. Not the person who caused the original harm. Not the system that enabled it. Not the pastor who covered it up. You become the stumbling block. You become the bitter root. You're the one that's out of step with the Spirit. But forgiveness is not holiness, if I can borrow that word again, if it's coerced. It's not healing if it's demanded and pushed on you. It's not freedom when it comes at the cost, the great cost of your voice, your truth, your justice. And you're not allowed to say not yet or maybe never. And you're never given the freedom to say, I want people to be held accountable. I want people to be accountable. And I'm allowed to love myself enough to say, I'm not offering closure to someone who didn't earn it. And if your church couldn't handle that, if your pastor preaches grace from the pulpit, but demands that you offer it while there's still trauma going on, that's not even like the process of healing hasn't even begun, that is not about Christ. That's not about the Bible even. It's not about Christianity. That's just pure control. That is just pure gaslighting. Forgiveness doesn't need to rush. It doesn't need pressure. It doesn't demand performance. Real forgiveness, when it comes, is simply your own choice to have that release. It's not a ritual to go through. It's not a mantra to say, I forgive you no matter what. It's a slow softening. It's a change in your perspective on them. It's relinquishing things. And it's yours to give when you're ready. If you're ready, ever. It's not theirs to take. So if you're still angry at something, if you're still grieving, if you're still holding space for the wreckage that they told you to, gloss over, paint over with lots of praise and worship, you're not broken. You weren't broken then. You're not broken now that you've escaped Christianity. You were becoming whole, and you are becoming even more whole now. And sometimes the very best thing you can say to somebody in your time in Christianity and now your time outside of it, simply, I'm not ready to forgive. I'm not ready to forgive. And mean it. I'm just not ready. You don't need to be forced into forgiveness. And that applies to every context, church included. But when they set this up in such, everything is cosmic. Everything is cosmic. Like, God has done these great things for you, so how can you not do this little teeny thing for God? Number one, it's mythology. There is no cosmic story that they're talking about. That's not real. But number two, the pressure for that is overwhelming. You don't have to forgive. They used forgiveness as a weapon. And it's time for us to heal from that incredibly toxic dynamic. The next topic I want to talk about is how Christianity pathologizes your emotional pain. Verses like Psalm 42:5, "Why are you downcast, O my soul? Put your hope in God." Philippians 4:6, "Be anxious for nothing." And many, many, many other verses like it. Somewhere along the way, your sadness became a bit of a sin. Your anxiety became a bit of a rebellion. Your depression, and certainly other mental health issues, but your depression became evidence that you didn't trust God enough. And your grief, it becomes like the spiritual problem. And it needs prayer. You don't need to process it and get, lots of time on your plate to just like slowly think through it. You need prayer, but you need to get back to the joy, joy, joy. And even as kids, we were taught that, I've got the joy, 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 joy down in my heart. Down in my heart to stay. I'm so happy, so very happy. I've got the love of Jesus in my heart. And you go on and on with those songs. And they go from the kids' songs to the adult version of those songs. But you believe it. Because when your emotions are always sort of under control and surveillance, when maybe an inner ache of some kind is treated like a barometer for your spiritual temperature and your spiritual fervor and your willingness to truly apply the gospel to your life, you start to see your pain as a bit of proof that you're failing. It's not like this is just normal human experience. This is normal human grief. Maybe this is a cry for help. This is a wound. It's in need of gentleness and care and true help, outside help. This is simply framed over and over in so many churches as evidence that something is wrong with you. And so you're encouraged and exhorted and cornered into repenting for feeling anxious, for crying too much, for having panic attacks, and for that ache inside that we talk about, that hollow, heavy ache that sets in and makes it almost hard to breathe, literally or metaphorically. And you're just told, cast your cares on the Lord because he cares for you. And so you do, over and over. And the weight never leaves. You're told Jesus' burden is easy and his yoke is light. But it wasn't. Because what you needed was not another Bible verse. What you needed was to be, number one, be aware of what the Bible is and that it's mythology. But number two, for your specific journey, you needed to be seen and heard and understood and held and told your sadness makes sense and it's okay. It's okay to be right where you are. You don't need to move on from your grief, from your depression. You need to honor your journey. And we're here to support you and help you. We're not here to judge you. But in the church, so many times, pain becomes pathologized if you do not turn it quickly into the joy of the Lord. There's occasional sort of places where it's carved out, like you're just going through the wilderness. Like God is bringing you to the promised land, but you're in the wilderness now. This is your 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. But that's a great place for God to find you. So let God find you in the wilderness, but don't stay there too long, because the Israelites in that story wasted 40 years. Like, don't waste your 40 years in a sense. Like, let God take you to the promised land. Just have faith, have eyes to see. Yes, there's giants there. There's giants in the land. We can take it. We can take the land. Focus on the promised land. Focus on your joy. Focus on the great things that God has done for you. They're all just variations on the same garbage. They're taking your eyes off of your own journey, off of your own self, off of your own experience, and your pain is again being pathologized. And instead of true therapy, which they're in no ways, should be giving, they're not qualified whatsoever to be doing any kind of therapy. They offer testimonies. Like, can I tell you tonight, friends, it's Wednesday night prayer meeting. We're going to sing 3 hymns, and then before we get into prayer time, we're going to do testimonies. Who's got a story? And someone stands up. You got the big ones. Oh, I was on drugs and now I'm saved. I was an alcoholic and look what God has done. I've been sober for the last 6 months. Praise the Lord. My marriage is getting better. But then you get these little ones of like, I was so sad. But God has done such great things. I have so much joy, and the peace is just swelling. It's like it's wave upon wave. I remember pastor at one point expositing Romans 8. Who can separate us from the love of God? And that verse where we talked about the heights or the depths, whatever. It's all over. And he described it as like, imagine you're plunging into a deep ocean, and the ocean is God's grace and love and beauty. And you literally, and you're not drowning like you're suffocating. You're able to live in this metaphorical sea, but like everywhere you go, you can't go down or up or left or right, this way, that way, without just being completely surrounded by the love and the joy of God. And when you realize that that is just a construct, that's all make-believe and fairy tales, that's all nonsense. And you really need actual trauma-informed care, self-care, but perhaps beyond that, you need trauma-informed care, and they're offering you an altar call. And if those don't work, if you're still struggling in some way, it sounds like you probably have some unconfessed sin. Maybe you open a spiritual door to something here. Maybe Satan has a foothold in your life. And suddenly your mental health isn't just suffering. It's spiritual warfare. It's your fault, your lack of faith, your disobedience, your doubt. Never mind the abuse. Never mind the trauma. Never mind the brain chemistry. Never mind the nervous system that's trying to protect you the only way it knows how. If you're still hurting, it's because you're not trying or believing hard enough. So you try harder, you believe more, you fast, you pray, you sing more songs, you do more worship, you memorize scripture, you get deliverance prayer, you lay on the carpet during worship, you put up your hands, you beg God, please make it stop. But it doesn't stop. And that's when the shame really sets in. You have this belief that maybe you're not suffering, maybe you're actually somehow spiritually defective. You become unfixable, unredeemable. Because in this world, this Christian world, your joy is an equation that's like this is the parallel to holiness. The more holy you are, the more joy you will have. Because the more you fix your eyes on the things above, and less on this world, your eyes will be filled with so much wonder. And the joy, like you are not going to cry in heaven. You're not going to be depressed in heaven. That's not even a possibility. You are going to dance nonstop. It will be so wonderful. It's like when a kid's birthday, when they see their birthday cake and it's much more amazing and the frosting is colorful in a way that they didn't expect. And there's streamers everywhere and there's glitter, and they thought they were getting a few presents and they got a lot more. It's a huge pile. And they're just like, wow, what a great birthday this is. It's like that times 1,000,000,000,000 in heaven, right? So if that's where your focus is, then how in the world can you be this depressed on earth? Your focus must be on this earth, but that's your fault. God is inviting you. Keep your eyes focused on me, on the life to come, on the kingdom. In a world where joy is equated with holiness, your sadness will become a scarlet letter. You can't just be anxious. You have to confess it. You can't just feel grief. You have to submit it to God. You can't just have depression. The church or you must somehow rebuke it. And in all these dynamics, your humanity is just being decimated. It gets lost. Your story, the real you, gets erased. Your pain gets spiritualized into oblivion. But, they comfortably ignore even some passages sometimes within the text, such as Jesus wept, Jesus grieved, Jesus sweat blood in the Garden of Gethsemane from anxiety, right? I know it's mythology, but it's like that's the story. But somehow, even though he did it, he did it with the right spirit. We don't have that spirit. We're the ones that are told our emotions are a sign of spiritual failure. And it's again, a lot of this is a form, in a sense, of colonization. I know we talk sometimes about colonization of other groups, other tribes, but this is in many ways colonization of your emotions. And I think we need to sometimes talk in that language to give ourselves the metaphors to see what's going on. Christians are in many ways in a system they can't sit with discomfort. There are certain things that just like, that is too much. Like I can't deal with that. So the fact that they have to, because there's people in the church that do deal with it and it gets in their face, they have to come up with some way to explain it out or deal with it. And in this case, for a lot of us, they almost try to cast it out like it's a demon. Like we can get rid of that and then get back to the joy of the Lord. And this is a worldview and a theology that would rather invalidate your pain than just witness it. The idea of sitting and saying, I simply see you. Not, I see you and I can fix it. I see you and I've got a quick answer for you. I see you and you're wrong. If you could see it like me or like God, like the Bible, we'll be all right. No, just I see your pain and I'll sit with you and I'll hold your hand. And that's the end of the discussion. I'll simply sit with you in your pain. They can't deal with that. It's very immature, very immature. This is very immature human behavior. But they're training themselves to be utterly juvenile, because this is a community that punishes vulnerability, because vulnerability threatens their illusion of constant joy. And you need to stop treating your depression like a demon. Stop seeing your panic, your bad days as proof of your unworthiness. Your emotional pain wasn't a sin. Number one, sin isn't a thing, but it's not a sin. It's not a problem. It's a signal. Your emotional pain is a signal, not that you've strayed from a God or the Christian perspective. It's just proof that you're still here, that you're still human, that you're soft enough to feel. And that's amazing. In many ways, Christianity, we've talked about this before in different aspects, but Christianity is a business of depriving you of your humanity. And in many ways, the deconstruction, deconversion process, even though it starts as simply, is Christianity real or not? Is it true or not? Is that God real? Is the Bible really divine? It in many ways shifts and it becomes, who are you? Who am I? And in many ways it becomes a simple statement. I'm just human. I'm still here and I'm human. And I'm feeling a lot. And I don't have an answer. And that's okay. You don't have to have an answer. There are no answers for a lot of it. We're just animals that got conscious through the long evolutionary process. And the beauty of consciousness is overwhelming, but also it's very painful. When we evolved consciousness, it got us to a point where the pain could literally just decimate our well-being, blow us away with how much a day can hurt, and how much we can look at beautiful things and not feel the beauty, not see the beauty anymore. We just see the darkness. We just see the emptiness. And it is sad that that's so often part of life, whether that's just part of, you're a mental health issue or you're actually dealing with severe issues in life, of real, problems that you just can't solve. But your humanity is a big part of this. Christians are traumatizers because they're pathologizing your pain, and in the process, they took away your humanity. Get it back. Get it back. Get your humanity back. Fight for it every day. Your humanity is beautiful, and it is worth reclaiming from the Christian worldview. The last topic I'm going to go over today is how Christianity creates traumatizers because it creates addictive emotional highs. And there's so much more I'm going to say in this whole series, so this is going to be the last one for today, but please do know that there's a lot more coming. This is the end of today's topics, but it is not the end of this series, so there's a lot more to come. But digging into this one, you would get the sense, the way people talked, that they were really tricking themselves into believing that the presence of God was there. You even hear, like, the presence of God is so thick in this room. I can feel him moving. You just feel the Spirit moving among us. Don't you feel that? Don't you feel, and you're like, yeah, I feel hairs tingling on the back of my neck. Is that the Spirit? And many of us used to live for some of these feelings, the rush during a worship song, especially during the bridge, and the swell of strings under when the pastor would have his closing prayer, and you hear the organ or the strings start to play, and the altar call crescendo music where everybody's sobbing and surrendering and even shaking, like the Spirit is just wringing them out like a wet towel. And it can be euphoric. And some of you have gone to churches where it's incredibly intense. I did not go to a church where it was that intense for the most part, but there was still a lot of times where it got intense, especially I would say for me more in youth group and in sort of getaways, where our youth group would go away for a week and you'd be preached to 4 times and have 3, 4, 5 worship services a day. But you're told you're feeling it's euphoric, and you're told it's transcendent, that this is part of holiness. And when they do this, they're basically getting you to a state of manipulated emotional ecstasy and enthusiasm that's carefully engineered to keep you coming back. Church services are designed like the high you would get from a drug. There's the buildup, there's the drop, there's the release, there's this flood of cortisol, of dopamine, of oxytocin, your tears. And then the crash that hits on Monday, the spiritual low. And you need to press in, fast and pray more, come back next Sunday for your next fix. It wasn't your faith that was inconsistent, and it wasn't that you weren't in a worship service enough times, or that you weren't worshiping enough at home to carry the feeling. It was that you were in a system. It was a system that was chemically choreographing your emotions and then shaming you when the emotions dropped and came down. Worship of this God character becomes a substitute for real intimacy in life. And group catharsis becomes a substitute for therapy that arguably a lot of us really, really, really needed in church. A room full of raised hands becomes a substitute for real connection, and you get addicted to the high. And you judge your closeness to God by how much you cried or how much you felt moved. And you thought conviction was like your stomach dropping out. Like, if my stomach drops and I feel this, I'm just taken to this higher plane of ecstasy with God. That's real. Like, that's the realest thing in this life, is being close to God. And peace feels like that weird stillness. Like right after the music fades, it's all intense music, then it slowly fades, and the pastor hasn't yet started speaking. He's come up to the mic, and he's closed his eyes, and he's about to pray to close the service, but there's like this, he waits for 10 seconds, and it's just like hushed. And you feel the peace. And when you don't have that, when you don't feel the excitement, you feel numb even, you're telling yourself, this is some kind of failure on my part. And in reality, that numbness was just your nervous system saying, I am freaking exhausted. But how would you and I have known? No one told you or me that what we were experiencing was a psychological loop. And I know we've talked about this a little bit before, but I'm just going to touch on it briefly here. But no one is teaching you in church how to regulate your emotions. No one is teaching you in church how to ground yourself. They just say, chase the presence and power of God. But the presence and the power were about your emotions and the chemicals, and they don't stay, not in that way, not in this big, booming, swelling emotional way. When it faded, you think it's just you now. The spirit has kind of gone on. Maybe they're at the next event. I remember there was a couple of years ago, I forget what the name of that church was or that school, but there was this thing where they started having a worship service for an hour at a chapel at a Christian school. Do you remember this? And like nobody wanted to leave. And everyone suddenly thought like, no one wants to leave. It must be the spirit. Like the spirit is somehow like specially in this room. And it was like you had to get tickets to get into this little chapel because, worship services have now been going on for 36, 72 hours. It's like, there's something special. Nobody wants to leave this. This is just like nonstop worship. It became like this 24/7 church for a while. And when it fades, when the zeal fades, it's like, what happened? Did the spirit, where's the spirit now? Like, catch me if you can. Which church is he at now? Which country is he in now? Doing amazing things. But you feel like this is in part the spirit's movement, but it's in part your lack of faith. It's part of maybe your impure heart, your failure to worship hard enough, long enough, real enough. It wasn't you. This issue was not you. You were in a machine. You were a cog in a freaking machine. And this emotional and liturgical roller coaster that they had you on was designed to hook your brain, your emotions, your body into equating performance with connection to God. And there's a reason for this. When you're on fire for God, you're going to tithe, right? If you're on fire for God and everything's about Him, certainly your paycheck's about Him. You're going to volunteer more than ever. You're going to submit. You're not going to ask the hard questions. You're too busy chasing that next mountaintop moment. Way too busy to notice the cracks in the damn wall in the system. Emotional manipulation, as toxic as it is, in the right context, it is unfortunately very effective, and Christianity has found the magic sauce. It's more effective sometimes than doctrine and dogma, more effective than the hard preaching. And I remember a lot of when I was in Bible college studying to be a pastor, they talked about this. They said, you need to understand people need to come to hear the preached word of God, but they're coming for the singing. And they almost feel like the singing is the church service. Like that's worship. They would literally say, I'm here for the worship. And they mean by that the singing. But you have to tell your congregants, no, listening to my sermon is also worship. Worship is renewing your mind and thinking God's thoughts after him, surrendering yourself to God, thinking better thoughts based on him, taking out the sin and replacing it with holiness. The Spirit is coming to reside in the rooms that you say, you know what, I had this closet. Spirit, I'm tired of hiding it. You can have that closet and that closet. That's worship. But the issue was a lot of people didn't see it that way. They came for the songs. And so we were encouraged as pastoral students, you have to train your people, train them. Your sermon is the worship too. But that's not how real life works. They weren't chasing our sermons. Our sermons, of course, were probably average at best, boring most of the time, perhaps even worse than that. But, those feelings that you have, they weren't God. They just weren't. They were sound systems. They were lighting cues. They were good psychology. They were musicians that are very carefully trained. Music that swells just when they need it to. And you're full of a room. This is also an issue of the community effect, that the group think. You're in a room full of people all trying to feel the same thing at the same time. And because if you didn't, if enough of you are like, 50% of us feel it, but the other 50 don't, well, maybe the Spirit's not here. But if you all feel it, that means it's real. Real connection doesn't always come with goosebumps. It doesn't require a full band. It doesn't need a bridge and a chorus and a fog machine. And it's not going to fade just because the music fades. So if you were feeling numb then, and especially if you're feeling numb still now, and if you're wondering, why don't you feel God? Why are you so, like his mountaintop is waiting for you. He's inviting you to come closer. If you feel like you were chasing something that never seemed to stay and it's your fault, please remind yourself, you weren't broken then. You're not broken now. You were waking up. We keep coming back to that phrase a lot. You were waking up. You were learning to separate chemical highs from real life and from actual healing. You were learning to be in your body without being manipulated. You were learning to find meaning in the quiet, not just the crescendo. Your coming down from these highs was not the end of your faith. It was the realization that this is all just make-believe. It's all made up. And I know sometimes we talk about how some of us in the group miss church. We miss the community at least. And I get that, and that's painful. It's painful to think I had this great community of hundreds of people that I thought I could go to. They cared about me. I could have 100 people pray for me in a heartbeat. It's hard to lose that. I understand that. But understand you were, and they still are, in a context that is a manipulative machine that's designed to get people's emotions in this state. They're trying to create a fake reality within the whole worldview, of course, but also within that church. And as much as it's sad to lose some of that enthusiasm, some of that ecstasy even, again, the unexamined life is not worth living. The unexamined church is not worth going to. The unexamined worship experience and emotional high is not worth continuing. Examine it. And if it's not real, and if it's a house of cards, it's based on nothing, it's time to find new meaning. And I would argue, this is just my 2 cents on this to wrap us up, I would argue that as you get more rational, that perhaps the enthusiasm isn't the same. The ecstasy, comes in different ways as you think through life, but there's a quiet calm that occurs when you realize I have control of my thoughts, and I have total control of when I get into an enthusiastic and ecstatic state. I control what I do to my emotions. I will not be manipulated. I would rather lose some of those experiences, those highs, and know that the manipulation is dropped and that I control myself. I control my mind and my heart, my spirit. I control this more than to know that I was living a lie. And I encourage you to do the same. Living a lie, even a lie that makes you feel like you want to jump in the aisles for Jesus. Living a lie that those emotions aren't worth it. There is a real high that comes when you realize you're finally living either in the truth or at least that you've escaped lies. And when I escaped Christianity, the peace that I had in the first hour, in the first day, was bigger than the peace I had in the combined 43 years I had as a Christian. It was overwhelming because I knew suddenly the chains, the shackles were gone. I was free to be myself for the first time in my life. And so are you. Keep claiming your life. Keep claiming your life. You're worth this effort. Keep finding the words to describe what happened to you and where you are now and where you're going. We'll be talking next time about starting with a topic of how the church and how Christianity enables and shelters abusers. We talked about that a little bit today. We're going to dive deeper into that in some different ways. But I do hope you'll come back for this series. It's going to be, again, 5 or 6 episodes, perhaps, give or take. I'll see how quickly some of them I might cover faster. But I do hope you'll keep also giving me feedback. It doesn't have to be in one way that, you with YouTube comments or, Facebook, email me. But people tell me, like, Tim, I'm learning some things, or at least you're making me think through some great topics. And I appreciate that so much. I want that encouragement. It does help me. But it helps me so much too when you say, hey, by the way, you said this, but did you think about this? I love when you all expand my mind. It is just, I live for it. You all do such a good job. And every day, honestly, I get probably feedback every day that I put in a note that's going to turn into a future monologue, because you all you blew my mind with some great thought. So let's keep doing this for each other. Let's keep building our community up. And again, find ways to find the words and find yourself. Reclaim your identity. This journey's worth it. You're worth it. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you soon.